What's happening? Whispered Bruno. What's going on? It happens sometimes, said Shmuel. They make people go on marches. Marches? Said Bruno, appalled. I can't go on a march. I have to be home in time for dinner. It's roast beef tonight. Shh, said Shmuel, putting a finger to his lips. Don't say anything or they get angry. Bruno frowned but was relieved that all people in striped pajamas from this part of the camp were gathering together now, most of them being pushed together by the soldiers so that he and Shmuel were hidden in the center of them and couldn't be seen. He didn't know what everyone looked so frightened about. After all, marching wasn't such a terrible thing, and he wanted to whisper to them that everything was all right, that father was the commencement, and if this was the kind of thing that father wanted, then it must be all right. The whistles blew again, and this time the group of people, which must have numbered about 100, started to march slowly together, with Bruno and Shmuel still held together in the center. There was some sort of disturbance towards the back, where some people seemed unwilling to march, but Bruno was too small to see what happened, and all he heard was loud noises like the sound of gunshots, but he couldn't make out what they were. Does the march go on for long? He whispered, because he was beginning to feel quite hungry and uncomfortable now. I don't think so, said Shmuel. I never see the people after they've gone on march, but I wouldn't imagine it does. Bruno frowned. He looked up at the sky, and as he did, so there was another loud sound, this time the sound of thunder overhead, and just as quickly the sky seemed to grow even darker, almost black, and rain poured down even more heavily than it had in the morning. Bruno closed his eyes for a moment and felt it wash over him. When he opened them again, he wasn't so much marching as being swept along by the group of people, and all he could feel was the mud that was caked all over his body and his pajamas clinging into his skin with all the rain, and he longed to be back into the house, watching all this from a distance and not wrapped in the center of it. That's it, he said to Shmuel. I'm going to catch a cold out here. I have to go home. I want to go home. But just as he said this, his feet brought him up a set of steps. And as he marched on, he found that there were no more rain coming down anymore because they were all piling into a long room that was surprisingly warm and must have been securely built because no rain was getting in anywhere. In fact, it felt completely airtight. Well, that's something, he said, glad to be out of the storm for a few minutes at least. I expect we'll have to wait here till it raises off, and then I'll get to go home. Shmuel gathered himself very close to Bruno and looked up at him in fright. Shmuel, um, I'm, I'm so sorry we didn't find your papa, said Bruno. It's all right, said Shmuel. And I'm so sorry we didn't really get to play. But when you come to Berlin, that's what we'll do. And I'll introduce you to what was their names again? He asked himself, frustrated because they were supposed to be three best friends for life, but they had all vanished from his memory now. He couldn't remember any of their names and he couldn't picture any of their faces. Actually, he said, looking down at Shmuel, they're not my best friends anymore anyway. It doesn't matter whether I remember them or don't. He looked down and did something quite out of character for him. He took hold of Shmuel's tiny hand in his and squeezed it tightly. You are my best friend, Shmuel, he said. My best friend for life. Shmuel may have opened his mouth to say something back, but Bruno never heard it, because at that moment there was a loud gasp from all the marchers who had filled the room as the door at the front was suddenly closed and a loud metallic sound rang through from the outside. Bruno raised an eyebrow, unable to understand the sense of this, but he assumed that it had something to do with keeping the rain out and stopping people from catching colds. And then the room went very dark, and somehow, despite the chaos that followed, Bruno found that he was still holding Shmuel's hands in his own, and nothing in the world would have persuaded him to let it go. Nothing more was ever heard of Bruno after that. Several days later, after soldiers had searched every part of the house and gone into all local towns and villages with a picture of the little boy, one of them discovered the pile of clothes and a pair of boots that Bruno has left near the fence. He left them there undisturbed and went to fetch the commandant, who examined the area and looked to his left and looked to his right, just as Bruno has done. But for the life of him, he could not understand what has happened to his son. It was as if he had just vanished off the face of the earth and left his clothes behind him. And that's the end of the story about Bruno and his family. Of course, all of this happened a long time ago, and nothing like this could ever happen again. Not in this day and not in this age. Thank you.